Have the powers that be been busy intentionally trying to crash the economy of the world in order to reset it? And is this what the Bible describes as the third seal of Revelation? Now ask yourself, why aren't there enough workers worldwide? Why are supply chains breaking down? Inflation is rising and banks are warning of a catastrophe, a debt collapse. A perfect economic storm seems to be brewing that may lead to the events of the third seal of Revelation. This is Last Days Breaking News with Nelson Walters, and we're starting to look at this issue right now. You see, if you want to reset the economy, if you're a bad guy, you have to take away everything a person owns. Their house, their retirement, their autos, every asset. How can you do that without causing a revolt? Who would allow that? No one in their right mind. Even the most government-friendly citizens who trust everything the government does would never assent to give up all of their assets and have them taken away. That is, unless you first make those assets worthless. How does somebody do that? With something called hyperinflation. To take your retirement account that might be worth, let's say, $40,000 right now and make it worth only $4. So, no one would give up their retirement account of $40,000 unless it suddenly in one day becomes worth $4. And this is exactly what the third seal of Revelation says is going to happen. Let's see how the governments and the global billionaires are going to try to pull this off. Have you been to the grocery store lately or to the restaurant? In a lot of cases, it's an exercise in what you can't have. Droughts in the western USA have led to vegetable shortages. Meat packing facilities have labor shortages. Docks in international ports have ships on them out in harbor unable to dock. And truck shipping firms are putting fewer trucks on the road. Quote, it's even more challenging now to find people who want to work on farms than it was before. We're perennially short-handed, said Executive Director of the Center for Dairy Excellence, Jane Seabright. As a result, processed plants can't crank out as much chicken, turkey, and other meats, which means grocery stores don't have as much in stock. With aluminum facing a crisis also, consumers can expect fewer canned goods. With a lack of materials to store the food, including vegetables, soup, and even drinks like soda and tea, producers will have to rethink their packaging or work with what they've got, which isn't a lot. In combination, this means empty shelves on grocery stores, and empty shelves means demand is greater than supply. If you took economics in high school, you know this means prices go up, fueling inflation. It's all a perfect storm. In nations like the USA, inflation is further fueled by the country printing money to pay for all those new social programs that are just being pumped out, it seems, on a monthly basis. New trillion-dollar plans are coming every month. The money you had last year is worth a lot less now than it was then, and it doesn't really matter what country you live in. But how much less can it be worth? What does Revelation say will happen in the end times? When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and the one who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." This is the infamous black horse of the third seal, which discusses a food price crisis. A denarius now was a Roman coin which represented a day's labor. When you worked a day, they'd give you a denarius. What the voice on the throne in heaven says in this passage is that during this period of time, the wages for a day's work will only buy a very limited amount of food. In other words, food prices are going to skyrocket. How much wheat would a day's work buy in this scenario? What's a quart of wheat? One day's wages could pay for about 3,600 calories of wheat because calories are very important. But let's not forget there are more days in a week than there are work days. Making that adjustment would allow only 2,750 calories of wheat per day. Now, the average person needs a minimum of 2,000 calories a day to survive, so this would supply one person's food requirements. But since the average wage earner provides for 2 or 3 other people, it equals slow starvation for most families. And of course, this doesn't allow for all the other expenses a person has, like housing, gas, etc. During the third seal, money will simply buy too little of everything. Jesus said there will be famines in diverse places, and that seems to be what the third seal is speaking of as well. How much food price inflation is this? I mean, what would wheat cost now, and what would it cost in that scenario? You're going to be surprised. In today's world, a quart of wheat costs 18 cents on the commodity market, and the median wage earner makes about $140 a day. That means the cost of wheat will inflate by almost 1,000 times. Or, if you like percentages, 100,000% increase. That isn't inflation, folks. It's something called hyperinflation. And in a hyperinflation situation, if prices go up 100,000%, well then everything that you once had is worth 100,000% less. This is the way you destroy the life savings of everyone, intentionally. There are also some very strange sections of this third seal prophecy. First, why is wheat 3 times the price of barley? Currently, wheat and barley are pretty similar in price. Maybe barley's 25% cheaper, but in this prophecy, it's 3 times cheaper. So in the end times, something happens to the wheat. It appears it's damaged. We know this because the voice says, don't damage the wine or the oil. So crop damage must play some kind of a role. Possibly the wars and revolutions of the second seal are to blame. In the book of James, we see another factor in the end times. Come now, you rich people, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will serve as a testimony against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields and which have been withheld by you cries out against you, and the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of armies. You have lived for pleasure on the earth and lived luxuriously. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous person. He offers you no resistance. The rich are withholding the wages of those working the fields, harvesting and mowing. So part of the problem in the future at the third seal might not just be the price or availability, but also the wages are being withheld. So that denarius is buying less because the denarius is less. Who are these rich persons who not only withhold the wages, but also put to death the righteous? They aren't just typical rich people. Are they the merchants and great persons of Mystery Babylon who create a one-world government? That is the position of one of our community members, Rick Knight, and I think that may be the case. Who else would these rich persons be in the end times? In this previous video, we discussed the formation of this coming one-world government led by what it calls the thought leaders. Who are these thought leaders? Well, we suppose they could be men like Obama and Gates and Klaus Schwab. So an important question to ask is, how soon could these events happen? In September, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon revealed the multinational investment bank is preparing for, quote, potentially catastrophic events that the United States defaults on its debt. While the government is planning on adding more debt, JP Morgan Chase is preparing for how to conduct business if the U.S. defaults on that debt. A possibility that, of course, would cripple the U.S. economy. And if the USA goes down, so does much of the world that depends on it economically. One must ponder whether the government adding this debt is doing so intentionally to crash the system. You know, it's not like they don't have expert advice even better than JP Morgan Chase. So why are they doing it? Again, it's a possibility they're intentionally trying to crash the system. And how soon can an economic crash happen? If you remember from 2008, it can happen in a matter of days. Let's also talk about all the job openings. Everyone is asking, why aren't there enough workers? In the USA, job openings climbed to its highest number in history last month, 11 million. That's 11 million jobs that no one is willing to fill. In July, the number was only 8 million. And at the time, most people thought that eliminating excess unemployment insurance benefits would force people back to work. Well, it didn't. Instead, the number of job openings increased by almost 40% more. This is not a random effect. And the number of open jobs is worldwide. It's not just in the USA or other developed countries where they were extended unemployment benefits. Rather, something else is afoot. But there is no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic was the driving force behind our workforce problem, and it's affecting all levels of the workforce. But it's likely not too little pay that's keeping would-be workers from surging into the workforce. Pay levels are at the highest in history. But there is fear of illness. COVID-19 still isn't over. But mostly, it's a recalibration of priorities and goals. After this once-in-a-century pandemic, that recalibration is happening at every level. White-collar, blue-collar, no-collar workers. Everyone is trying to navigate how to structure the return to the office. Just this week, a member of my church was telling me how few workers he had in his trucking firm. This was like shocking to me, as truckers can earn a very reasonable salary and have very little potential exposure to COVID. So I asked him why. Why do you have so few workers? His answer was retirement. Droves of workers in their 50s and 60s were retiring early. COVID had convinced them that life was short and they didn't need the income anymore. Many two-income families were seeing one of the breadwinners retire for this exact same reason. And then there are the health mandates in many parts of the country. Many people are deciding that the job just isn't worth the jab. These mandates lead to more vacancies as workloads of the remaining workers dramatically increase, and they get stressed out and they leave. So in this swirling economic storm, what should a Christian do? Several of our community members have asked us this privately and pointedly. What should we do specifically? Our position on this is that everything we do should be for the kingdom, to provide not just for ourselves, but for God's household. Jesus says the exact same thing. Who then is the faithful and sensible slave, whom his master put in charge of his household slaves, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. This obviously implies we are to be putting away food for the shortages that Jesus told us are coming. But frequently we're asked, how can we put away enough food for our entire church? Obviously, you can't. But remember, Jesus fed 5,000 with nothing more than a little boy's lunch. The boy provided everything he had to Jesus, and then Jesus multiplied it. We are to put away our lunch, so to speak, Give it to Jesus at the appointed time in the end times, and let Jesus take it from there. And he will. Anyone who watches our channel knows this is a key teaching of ours, putting things away for the end times. Food that stores for the long term is important as well because, we aren't sure how long away that appointed time is going to be. How much should we put away? Joseph set aside 20% of each year's food supply in Egypt during the years prior to the coming famine. If you are spending $100 a week on food, then put an extra $20 a week away for this future needed supply. Remember, Jesus said there will be famine. True faith is trusting what Jesus said will happen, and to act accordingly. What else should Christians do? Well, if cash becomes worthless in the coming years, anything tangible is something to consider keeping on hand, not only for your own use, but for barter as well. What will be valuable? Preppers will tell you that groceries, guns, and gold are the 3 categories of things that hold value in a time of crisis. Although this channel isn't a gun advocate channel, boxes of ammo will have tremendous value in the future for bartering. Handheld water purification bottles and filters is another thing to consider to acquire. And based on what's happened in this pandemic, some antibiotics and maybe some general antivirals like the one on the screen are a good thing to put away because Jesus also told us there will be pestilences in the future. If you are able to invest in gold and silver, that probably also is wise. Gold is going to have value, but buy the smallest denomination gold coin or silver coin possible. Remember, you're acquiring this for barter, not as an investment, and small coins can be traded as if they were cash. So if all of this can happen in days, we need to prepare in advance. The account of Joseph in the Bible provides us with all kinds of information, not just about prepping, but also about the world elite and what they might be planning. In Genesis, there is an account of how Pharaoh used the famine to acquire all the assets of Egypt and turn its people into slaves. Click right here to keep watching, to discover how that ancient record might repeat itself in the modern day with the Great Reset and the global elites, and the step-by-step process those elites might take to take over. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.